You're watching Beyond Markets. Welcome. I am Wole Famurewa. On the show today, we'll take a look at how Angola is strategically positioning itself as an investment destination. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets and follow my Twitter handle as well at Wole Famurewa and share your thoughts. The government of Angola, in partnership with the World Bank Group, has identified some sectors as strategic in boosting economic growth in and to showcase business opportunities in Angola to private sector investors. Bongiwe Kunene, the World Bank's Group Executive Director for Angola, Nigeria and South Africa, joins me now from Johannesburg to analyze Angola as an investment destination. Bongiwe, thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. And I would just like to start by getting your perspective on how you view Angola in general as an economy. Now, recently we saw McKinsey put out a report and it listed Angola as one of, quote, volatile grower economies. Now, clearly that is speaking to the volatility in growth that is largely linked to commodity prices. And we've seen that play out as well in places like Nigeria. I want to get your perspective on where Angola is right now and the prospects going forward.
Thank you very much for having me. Angola right now is at a very promising starting phase. Like many commodity exporters, in the last 3 to 4 years, they have had a volatile period because of the changes in oil price. But the story of Angola has changed. You may know that last year they had elections in August and a new government was elected. President João Lourenço is the new president. And they've initiated a series of reforms. And among those reforms, they have put at the center the need to diversify the economy. So what we're looking at now is an economy that is positioning itself to really take its rightful place in the Africa growth story. As you know, Angola is the third largest economy in Africa, but that has been largely underpinned by the sale of oil. What they are looking at now is macroeconomic reforms, wide-ranging, that is going to strengthen the Kwanzaa and make sure that trade flows are open and there is more trade with the rest of Africa, and they are strengthening their relationships with all other African countries. And on top of that, there is a lot of new movement in terms of exchange rate, and there's much to look forward to in Angola.
All right, you say that, but when you look at the situation, it's really a tough environment. I point to the banking sector, for instance, where I hear that bad loans in Angola have more than doubled in the last 3 years. We know unemployment is really high. I think it's above 30%, sorry, more above 20% rather. So it's a difficult environment. Interest rates are high. Inflation is still relatively high. The big question is, in bringing macroeconomic stability to the economy, what's your perspective on the policies that will drive that before we begin to even think about diversifying the economy?
Well, it's getting the macroeconomic fundamentals right. So compared to other economies, maybe in the rest of the world, you can say that it's a volatile situation. But compared to most growing economies, emerging economies right now, we are having a tough time in a number of emerging economies. And Angola is not an exception. It's also been having a tough time. What is new and promising is the measures that have been put in place. There is now free flow of funds. They are putting measures to attract new investors, and they've looked at the experiences of other emerging markets. So what they've put now ahead is they've got special economic zones. They've changed most of the laws which have got an impact on investment. Now, you don't even have trouble in terms of coming and going because it's so much better now. They've targeted African investors, particularly in the agri sector, the whole value chain of agriculture, because they have a huge potential in that area. It's an economy which has got a geography that's got very good climatic conditions and the potential to grow varies from crop to crop, but more than just growing, they also want to attract the value chain of agriculture. So agro-processing is going to be a big venture for different spaces inside of Angola. And most of the economy has been driven about what's going on in Luanda. Right now, they're also looking at other parts of Angola. So the provinces, it doesn't matter which province you are looking at, whether it's the Kunene or the Cabinda, all the other areas, there are efforts to generate new opportunities for growth.
Many would say that the prospects of transforming economies across Africa in places such as Angola and indeed Nigeria as well could be seen as mere rhetoric. We have seen in Nigeria, for instance, a very bold statement around moving away from a focus on oil revenues. Over the last couple of years, yes, we have definitely seen some programs along those lines, but many will also say that those efforts have not been transformational in terms of their impact to create jobs and, of course, to drive economic growth. What do you think will be critical to making the moves in Angola transformational, making that impact that will indeed create jobs and, of course, drive a lot more growth?
I would like to pinpoint three. Angola has had a lot of investments in its young people. So getting and absorbing young people into the economy could be a game changer. And because of the readiness of most of the youth for job opportunities, it's going to be a matter of expanding the opportunity and making sure that young people are involved in many sectors. The second issue for Angola that would be a game changer is tourism. It's a country that's been vastly underexploited when it comes to tourism. So whether you are looking at ecotourism or the usual tourism that people go for when they go to South Africa, to East Africa or West Africa, much of that has not been happening in Angola. And this is their opportunity that's available now. Lastly, what would also be an addition to the growth story of Angola are the changes in the governance and the processes that are accompanied by that. We have seen a lot of wide-ranging changes on the governance fronts, and all of it is very exciting, it is new, and we are waiting for great results. You will know that the World Bank has this Doing Business Index that is published every year. And Angola has taken measures to address most of those issues which are identified there. And let's have this conversation next year, and we'll point to the results for you.
Well, we certainly look forward to that. And I would argue that the last point that you made is perhaps the most important. The leadership that political leaders bring to bear in driving these reforms, I think, are very critical. But clearly, the World Bank is a big believer in Angola. I can see a couple of programs where you are supporting the government there. There is a $130 million support for commercial agriculture. We also have some projects relating to water services. Can you just speak to your early experience, if you like, in terms of engaging this government and what you expect in terms of its impact?
We've had engagements with Angola. They were not as wide-ranging as we would have liked, but most of it was also foundational. So past engagements included those which you have mentioned in agriculture, but we've also helped the government on the public finance management side and on water regeneration, water systems, particularly for the city of Luanda. And we are now ready to do more, explore more outside of the capital, and also look at high growth impact areas. And in most areas, it's not going to be starting from scratch because there have been continuous improvements. What we need to do now is really to accelerate and try as hard as we can to have a crowding in effect, which is this approach we are taking now, where we are saying, let's maximize our finance for development. So it's not the World Bank only that's going to be the game changer. We are looking at crowding in private sector, but also crowding in the African Development Bank and other multilateral systems to come and be part of this story of changing Angola.
And in terms of that multilateral assistance, I do know that the previous government wasn't big on getting an IMF loan. And in terms of engaging the Bretton Woods institutions, how critical do you think that could be in terms of stabilizing the economy to really attract this foreign investor interest? Because clearly, one of the big challenges that many investors would point to is stability in the currency, and very often getting into programs like those that the IMF offer is perhaps one way to achieve that. I want to get your perspective on how critical you think that could be.
Discussions with the IMF started some time ago, and we are expecting that that would be a positive outcome. The program that is being discussed is driven by the country itself, so I do not expect that there will be issues. The Minister of Finance, the Central Bank Governor, they are heavily involved in this, and the amount that has been publicly spoken about has been $4.5 billion. I'm not sure in terms of tranches how that would go, but all that I know is that between the IMF and the World Bank, there is a concerted effort on making sure that we boast and we put each other forward, put the country first, and all the investments that we are going to make are that which has been determined by the country, and it is led by the country.
All right, we'll continue this conversation after the break. I do have to take a break right now. I've been speaking to Bongiwe Kunene, the World Bank Group's Executive Director for Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa. If you're just joining us, we're looking at Angola and how Angola is strategically positioning itself as an investment destination. Still with me is Bongiwe Kunene, the World Bank Group's Executive Director for Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa, joining us from Johannesburg. We'll be getting to talk a little bit about Nigeria and South Africa later on, but let's finish with Angola. And you did mention that there is an event that you're participating in. Can you just give us some perspective on your expectations from that event and its impact in terms of luring foreign investors into the country?
What we are looking at is a roundtable scenario where each of the investors coming from the agri-sector, from tourism, and also from services will be in the same room with key members of the Angolan cabinet. We will also have the central bank governor there. The expectation is that investors will ask directly to government about the reform programs, and of course, they will have questions which have impact on their businesses. So I expect some of the questions could include the exchange controls, the availability of foreign exchange, and repatriation of profits. So we will hear directly from investors what are the real impediments if they want to invest in Angola. On the other hand, we will also hear from the Angolans what measures they've put in place. For example, they will take us to a special economic zone, and in the special economic zone, we will see the sites that are available for companies that will be in the manufacturing, because the country is very keen that every investment that comes into Angola is not just only for Angola. They would also want to have an opportunity to expand their exportable products. And we will see that, and we will assess for ourselves whether the special economic zone is adequately catered for and whether it is designed properly for the investors who will be in the room with us. And lastly, we will have an opportunity for the IFC, the private sector arm of the bank, to have a discussion with these investors and put on the table what the IFC can do to work with them when they're financing their ventures in Angola. More than just financing, the whole World Bank Group also has guarantees, and we'll be talking about the risk scenarios and how we can ameliorate some of those risks.
If we can speak briefly to Nigeria and South Africa. And starting with Nigeria, I just want to get your thoughts on the growth that we're seeing in the country right now. I do know that the World Bank has been working with the government on several programs. The power sector is one where we continue to struggle to see sustainable improvement in supply and distribution. I wanted you to reflect on your engagement with Nigeria so far and what we can expect going forward.
We are going to be launching in Abuja the Doing Business study for Nigeria. Last year, we had a very big leap in the rankings for Nigeria because under the leadership of the Vice President, they put up a team, and this team has been going from state to state, talking to investors, particularly the small-scale entrepreneurs, on what it is that needs to change in undertaking businesses in Nigeria. As a result of that, Nigeria moved 28 places on the ranking index. So that was unprecedented. We will be launching on Thursday, and we will see how far Nigeria has changed. But I'm very positive that what will be revealed will still be also very pleasing. In terms of the other projects that we have, you touched on power. It's a very, very complex area of engagement. As you know, you have the discos, and it's part of the story of what has not worked has been that the distribution companies, I'm not sure why, because they are part of the private sector, have not been able to take charge of the opportunity that was given when there was liberalization and reforms in the previous engagement on the power sector. We are now working with Nigeria anew, looking at ways of making sure that apart from deepening the government sector reforms, we are also addressing the impediments on what would new private capital need for the power sector to be attended to properly. Because if you were to do a diagnostic, I would say that power is one of the greatest obstacles for Nigerian growth. There is a plant, Azura Power, which is funded by the private sector. It's been working really well. I think what would be a game changer would be a replication of that independent power producer, like the one that you have with Azura. It's really, really working well.
Okay, so we have an economy that is clearly struggling in recession. Unemployment is so high. And I was just, before this interview, I was just taking a look at a couple of comments out there, especially about taking tough decisions. Like you mentioned earlier, government sector reforms. And the President of South Africa recently has more or less, if you like, guaranteed that there will be no rationalization of the workforce in the public sector in terms of dealing with the recession. Now, many will say that that's an example of inefficiency, not taking tough decisions that are needed to stabilize the economy and put it on a strong path for growth. I wanted you to react on the challenges with that economy and the best way forward.
Well, right now, the South African economy, maybe let's look at it in two ways. The first one is on the performance of the currency. It is not a unique story. It's been affected together with the other emerging economies. And what we are seeing in Turkey and in Argentina and other countries has had a very marked effect on the rand. So that is something to be expected because it is part of that emerging market story. When it comes to the real economy, on the other hand, there have been issues of concern. And those issues are being addressed. For me, I would say that maybe the biggest gap in the South African economic story has been the trust between the various players on the economy. And when I see from outside looking in, it looks like the South Africans are coming together and they're addressing that trust deficit. It's not going to be easy. As you had said, with a recession, everyone needs to be involved. And the technical recession that is currently ongoing, I really have a sense that it's going to be very shallow because all the fundamentals are being addressed. And there is no lack of leadership in terms of governance right now.
Right. But I think what is common across these three economies is the need for capital, private capital, multilateral capital, if you like. I want to hear your thoughts on what the authorities in these countries need to do to attract even more capital. I know it's going to be all about reforms, but maybe you can speak specifically to each country and your thoughts on what are the low-hanging fruits that can attract a lot more capital to these countries.
Well, in general, I would start by saying that capital, private capital in particular, it's very shy. So whenever you are attracting capital, the first issue is how stable are you? On the stability front, all the three economies are quite stable for now. And I would say that for private capital, it is not a problem to come and go in either Angola, Nigeria, or South Africa. So the real test is going to be, do you want to diversify? Do you want to attract capital which has not been in your economy before? And the answer for all three is, of course, yes. Now, what are the measures that you are going to put in place to tell a story that is coherent, convincing, and sellable to the private investors? I will start with Angola. With Angola, it has been a story of governance and making sure that you address all the perceived chronic capitalism issues of the past. And these are being addressed very visibly right now, and it's giving a measure of confidence to private investors who are coming outside of Angola. For Nigeria, for the long term, the story has been you need to strengthen also, it's not just a power issue, but you also need to strengthen the ability of collecting taxes. So the efficiency that can be generated inside of Nigeria are not going to be brought in first and foremost by private investors coming from outside. There's a lot of efficiency gains that are going to be generated inside of Nigeria itself. For South Africa, it's a story of when you are addressing these new investors that you want to come into the country, you have also to demonstrate that the investors who are in the country have confidence in undertaking more investments because they are there, and there is this gap I've spoken about earlier. And if internal investors could be seen to be participating in full in the economy of South Africa, new investors would also want to come in and compete.
We'll call them the big three. Very useful insights into these economies. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I've been speaking to Bongiwe Kunene, the World Bank Group's Executive Director for Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa. And that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, you can watch all previous episodes of Beyond Markets on our website, cnbcafrica.com, and stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets and follow me at Wole Famrewa. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.